Wow, very good morning to everyone. A very warm welcome. We are precisely on time, as we can see.
Yeah, it's brilliant to be on time, and it's brilliant to have psychedelic lights this early in the morning while everyone's still sharp, I think.
That's true. I'm not sure if we can do anything about that, but let's carry on. So, Ronnie, thank you so much for being with us today. It's really a pleasure to kickstart this event. And as we've heard, we're here really to talk about skilling and scaling up and what it means in your experience to build a skilling giant. And who better to talk to us about this today than yourself, philanthropist, entrepreneur, thought leader, author. So let's really get right to it. Maybe we can start by understanding your journey with Upgrad. Can you tell us a little bit about it, and what was your approach when it comes to offering a process of skilling the workforce to keep in mind a sustainable future?
So maybe I'll try and take this up in a slightly more broader perspective for the audience, because I think there's a lot of relevant things that you've asked in the question. Firstly, I think for everyone here, skilling is actually a word we all need to firstly upgrade, because of the simple reason that for most of us, skilling sounds like a little bit of a tweak. It sounds like a core competence. It also has a certain halo that it is more meant for a few material aspects. I think today, the way we use upskilling is really that all the calendared events that we had in our life of learning is actually over. So I think firstly, I'd like to leave a very strong thought that skilling is really going to happen much more here, because the connotation of skilling is it happens with the physical sense, right? And I think that learning of rewiring your brain. Today, why do we feel the next generation is smarter or better or moves faster? I think it's because every 5 years, there's a new wiring that's happening to generations. But obviously, for us to keep updating ourselves, we need to rewire ourselves. So I think for me, every 2 to 3 years, how am I going to look at rewiring myself? And I think it comes in various compartments. Again, when we look at skilling, we look at something where I'm here, and 3 or 4 inputs will come to me. I think today the word skilling needs to be reversed, because you need to be out there and your mindset has to really change if you want to upskill yourself. So first time skilling is to be redefined, and it's not in that menial sense. The second one is we need to understand our consumer better. The people who are going to succeed are people who understand consumers better and who are going to preempt trends. Maybe 5 years back, when somebody asked me when I wanted to work with colleagues, what would be a criterion, I'd say I'm looking for problem solvers. Today, I think I'm looking for people who can identify problems before they become problems, not necessarily problem solvers. So if you look at the DNA of what is needed today in the 21st century for how, in a job, at a mid-level or a senior level, see, because I think most people look at leadership as only at the top. But I think today, if 5 people or 10 people are reporting to you, you're a leader. So how do you change that mindset? And I know I've sort of broadened that one, but since this is an opening part of the conversation, I thought I'd just define broader views so that when we get into it, we'll be able to understand that today, it's not about what you're going to be taught, it's how you're going to be out there. If you're going to really look at rewiring yourself for the 21st century, I would say 50%, and I'd give you an anecdote here. We run a large university, and it's situated at BKC. And I'd taken the head of 2 of the big 4 consulting firms, and McKinsey and somebody else, to present to about 200 students, undergrads, as to what are the careers of tomorrow. And I think within 2 minutes of everyone authoritatively from McKinsey and everyone talking about it, the kids actually just said, and they're not kids, right? I mean, they all said, wait a minute, I think we'll tell you what are the careers of tomorrow. Because the careers of tomorrow is not what y'all are going to ordain, but it is really what we believe over the next 10 years we want to do. What is going to be our consumer habits? And it was an interesting pivot of a conversation. That was a penny-dropping moment for me, at least, that says we come in with preconceived notions, and then we're not being able to move that around. So sorry, I sort of took a very broad stroke on this, but I think it was relevant to sort of put that context before we can get into more details.
Sure, thank you. And well, actually, in that case, on that note, speaking of the workforce of tomorrow, how would you say organizations can look at really building the workforce in a sustainable manner, in a way that the workforce sticks? There's an ROI that's warranted for the organization. How would you approach sustainability?
So let me just start that I think a lot of people looked at training and motivating a workforce where when you come in, you're hiring people that are freshers. And actually the flaw was you suddenly realize they may not be job ready or job aligned. So what you have is somebody coming in and then you're sent out for 3 months of training. By that time, the culture has gone to another level. I think today, that pivot is also happening. Organizations have to, see, attrition, I think today is a way of being. Because today, for most people, a career enhancement is at the end of 1 year, 1.5 years, if I haven't got a promotion letter and if I haven't got an increment, I'm not growing. And I think that's also flawed. There's nothing wrong with that, but it's flawed. Because at the end of 3 years or 4 years or 5 years, you might have 3 promotion letters or 3 different jobs in which you've got to bump up. And you might be able to go back home to your parents or your spouse and actually talk about the fact that how you moved. But in that 5 years, your learning curve will have been much slower than if you were a consistent person. And I think today corporates are looking for that level of consistency. That's one. I think the second is more and more what we call soft skills. And I know it's because it's soft, nobody really actually gets it. Everyone yeah, communication skills, yes, skills to get past an interview. I mean, actually I call it super skills now, not even soft skills, because it is like superpowers. If you have 1 or 2 very strong soft skills, you're going to stand apart, because organizations today are going to look for the top 50 percentile. 5 years, 10 years back, if you were in that bottom 10%, you were in trouble, because at the end of every year in an increment cycle, you would feel, I've got to move the last bottom 10% out. Today, I think organizations are looking for the top 50 percentile, not the top 90 percentile. So how are you going to be able to reinvent yourself, learn in an organization, show consistency? I think are the challenges that organizations are looking for today.
Fantastic. And, you know, they say that India is really sort of at the crux of becoming a global talent superpower. Skilling is a huge focus across the country, across sectors. So what is your view on this? And where do you see the talent force and the skilling, the effort into skilling India going?
Yeah, no, I think that mantra is very strong, because obviously we're now the largest population in the world. So firstly, we don't have a choice, right? Because the next 200 million jobs are not just going to come from the normal sectors that are there. They're not going to come from IT. They're not going to come from BFSI. They're not going to come from the normal ones. So it's going to come from a creation of a new element, and to quite an extent, entrepreneurs getting their act together, that you're actually going from that small enterprise to becoming large and medium enterprises. So I think that is really where it's going to go forward. So I think the opportunity for India to be actually a skilling capital, because essentially what technology has now done is you can take the best of minds and be able to do that there. So I think there's a phenomenal opportunity. It's also an opportunity. Most opportunities become big when you're not in outsourcing. So I think the IT companies here did an incredible job, but being an outsourced capital. But today, I think when you're looking at skilling, the large domestic market in itself is going to be huge. And I think China worked well, because a lot of what they do for their domestic market, and then there's an export market. And that's when you can bring scale. And I think that for the next 10 years is India's opportunity in many aspects. An incredibly strong domestic market, and the opportunity to have the arbitrage to export.
So when it comes to, as we were just talking about China and the impact of the Indian population growth, how do you see India overtaking China in population size? Does it mean more jobs and more opportunity, or maybe more competition?
It's a challenge, right? Because I think we have about 600 million people that live in rural India. The good part is that they're not as poor as what they've been before. And I think we don't have people with more than abject poverty. Over the last 3 years of COVID, I think we have regressed, but the world has also regressed, where the bottom of that possible pyramid has got a little worse. So I think there's an opportunity here from a demographic one, but I know that's something we all say. The main point is how we're going to take advantage of it. The difference with China is when they moved 200 million people out of rural into urban, they did it in their own way. We're a practicing democracy. We'll have to do it in a much more aware where people want to do that. We have a large foundation in rural India, and I can tell you the aspirations of the young people in rural India are equal to the ones in urban India. The opportunity is where the lacking is. So therefore, my single line is, we have to create multiple opportunities, and they'll have to be unique to India as compared to Africa or any other developing country or Indonesia, and definitely past that. So to me, creating 15,000 cashew entrepreneurs in rural Maharashtra and the Konkan belt, because it's known for that, and each of those cashew entrepreneurs hiring 15 people, in itself is as strong enough as 2 food delivery companies hiring and transitioning people. So that, I think, is really where India's opportunity lies. And I think in media, we always evangelize with the top 20 companies and the coveted word for a lot of startup founders, which is unicorn, but actually they don't mean much, because the real progress is happening in the heartland and in the middle of the pyramid, not at the top of the pyramid.
And this is a subject that you know a lot of, because through your second innings, now you're focusing a lot on the social sector and, of course, the other sunrise sector in India, which is online education through Upgrad. So I'm sure the audience would love to know a little bit more about this, about your new ventures and where you see them going.
So just personally for me, I think it's been a very strong objective since we founded Upgrad about 7 years ago. And basically, I mean, firstly, we don't see ourselves as an ed-tech company. I think the word tech came about because a lot of people wanted to raise funds. Tech was a romantic word out there when 9 or 10 VC funding companies would like to see a tech word, so you inserted it there. But at the core, I think the opportunity for learning, formal learning, for skilling and for workforce development is large, and that's how we position Upgrad. I think the opportunity here is building respectability, that online is an optionality. And I think to quite an extent, COVID opened that up because suddenly online became acceptable. The downside is deep learning or understanding or moving your mindset is not going to be just by a Zoom call or a TED Talk. It's a much more participative process. So I think our vision and my passion to be able to move this along is at least 75% of the people who feel they need to progress and learn in their career or upgrade themselves or upskill, firstly, don't see the need. They don't see the urgency. And second, we don't have the optionality. I would say 80% of people have moved into a career because they had to. They needed to support their family and for socioeconomic reasons. And now you're stuck in a time warp because you're damned if you do. Very few people have the luxury to take a year off to actually top themselves up in anything they want to do, formal or informal. The 2-3 strong realizations for me in the last 7 years of what we formed Upgrad is the future of learning is going to be as much peer-to-peer as it is when you're looking at a professor or lecturer and the way you talk down. Second, we've got incredible faculty and teaching talent in India, but actually each one of us is a teacher. And normally we'd be invited to a guest lecturer, and at the end of that, on a Saturday afternoon, we do that, and that would be the impact. But today, the online and technology allows you to be actually a teacher by contributing 8 hours a month, 20 hours a month, or 30 hours a month. So industry professionals coming to the online space and peer-to-peer learning, much more than you would be able to do in a formal classroom, is, I think, the power of how learning is going to change as we go forward. And that's pretty much where our investment is.
Fantastic. Well, thank you for setting that context. And just to understand a little bit further when it comes to Upgrad, what would you say are some of the pillars of operation that really help you sort of turbo boost your performance and keeping the efficiency extremely high?
So three, four things. One, I think most people feel when you get into college or get into formal learning, you can't be a dropout because it's a public affair. And the beauty in online is if you just don't log on the next day, you're a dropout, but nobody knows it. So we've got to change that entire approach. So the first one is, as I said, the ability to build community and study groups. And everywhere, people are learning from each other. So that power for us of creating that peer-to-peer learning platform, which is 10 times better. Today, I don't think anyone goes and picks an airline, a hotel, or holiday, or any consumer product without actually having a referral. Marketing ad campaigns are no longer, they just create awareness. But the real purchasing decision happens when you refer the context to 10, 20 people. So how in learning are you going to get your colleagues? Because the reference to context and learning from a professor or an industry professional will be one size fits all for 100 people. But when you've got a peer group of 20, 30 people. So I think one is that. The second is completion track records. I think the reason online today doesn't have the credibility still that offline has is because exactly the visibility of offline means you need to finish it. But a lot of us take gym memberships. We are all connected for the first 2 months, but I don't think anyone utilizes a full 12 months. Only 5% of the people are diehards who will finish that. And I think if you look at that, completion of an online course for us, we're at 85% completion track record, which I think means that we've been able to hold their hand. And the third one is, teaching is not about consuming content, it is an entire process of learning experience. So we have a lot in terms of interactive, what I would call counselors, because when you're having a bad week, for most people learning online, it's one of the most tough decisions you're taking, right? Because firstly, you're spending money. Second, you've divided your life into 3 parts. One is your work life, and second is your personal life. And now you have a study life for which you've got to give those extra 10 to 15 hours a week. So it's not a tough part, but it's also an investment you're going to make that's going to be there. So I think the ability to be able to have peers and buddies that help you. So I think the 3 criterions, peer-to-peer learning, high completion records, and it's the learning experience and not just consuming content that's making the difference for people to do that. Now, today, the other trend is a lot of people are still interested in formal learning and education and a degree and a diploma, and it's fantastic. But more and more, I think people are looking for that 6-month or 9 months to be a little bit more job ready. And more it's the soft skills and super skills. So you put that all together, that's not something you're going to get in the offline space today.
Well, I mean, hearing you describe in so much clarity and detail how you approach your business and efficiency, it's no wonder that you are such a fan of encouraging the youth and the young generation to get into entrepreneurship like yourself. But, you know, Ronnie, given the current markets, the situation with having investment as an opportunity, the volatility that young entrepreneurs face today, would you really recommend that this is the time for them to take the plunge?
Yes, absolutely. There isn't a better time today if you want to start something than any other time, because the simple, and I'll put myself, I didn't have the luxury that says, so if you are looking to start something on your own, you're going to need an incredible amount of self-conviction. If you're looking for a market that is ready to continue to fund you, and if you look at capital as your number one priority to get started in life, you're going to have a problem all the way. Because if that's going to remain your number one priority, I think you're doomed. The idea of being able to start a business today necessarily without funding is not the criterion. So my first thing would be absolutely. This is a much more sane environment where you will be judged on merits and not your storytelling ability, which is also important. This is the time where you can build businesses to last in a lot more part. And number 3, it'll teach people that capital comes 3rd or 4th in the priority of how you want to build your business. And there's a lot more that happens than just capital. So clearly, absolutely. And why? Because if you look at where we're growing as a country and the domestic market here, of course it's price sensitive. Of course it's broken up in many different angles. But the scalability that you can get in India, the opportunities that you can get in India, the attention and the growth of the domestic market today is something that we're experiencing which people need to catch the wave of and not get worried about, I'm waiting for the, into inverted commas, funding winter, whatever that is. I don't know what that means, but it's a coin by the media and for a few entrepreneurs, that you need to wait for anything.
So how would you guide and recommend budding entrepreneurs to really approach building a solid foundation of their business regardless of the so-called funding winter?
I mean, I think when I started off, the market wasn't as robust as this. There was absolutely not even a definition of angel, venture capital, or private equity. Angels would be what we would look at as angels, not angels in this sense. There was nobody coming here to give you a funding. In fact, at that time, debt and banking was not an option, right? So I think your perseverance, you need to figure out exactly what you're going to build. And I think from a point of view, capital comes really after the second and the third part. And I think when I started off, I started a B2B business because it was a cost-plus business. I needed to establish a market. The first 30 people that one attracted was much more on goodwill than whatever else. So I think we underestimate our own power and conviction and clarity of thought, because if you're clear that's what you want to do and you don't have a choice, you'll go for it. You will not have capital as the lack of it. And let me be the last to say here, there is a lot of capital flowing for now what is good businesses and not people who are burning money. And I think there's an opportunity there. That doesn't mean that's going to come to you first on, and it's going to be because you haven't got that scale, but the opportunity is right there and waiting for it to happen.
That's really inspiring. So coming back a little bit to workforce and maintaining and sustaining a dedicated workforce, like you said, it takes time to build up the skills and then really see the ROI. So how do you and your organizations, as such an illustrious entrepreneur in India, how do you approach keeping your workforce united, working towards a singular goal and really keeping the pillars of the organization strong?
See, I think leadership today is a very different challenge. If I had to define leadership qualities today, I think they're very, very different than what I would do 5 years back, right? I mean, for me, I think the world is very, very fragile. The business is very, very fragile. What does that mean? There is a constant sense of change. When that change happens, it's coming faster, higher, and with deeper impact than ever before, number one. Second, when you fall off the cliff and something fails, you don't have too much of a chance to even open your parachute. That's what's really happening. You've seen that across the board where you had a hype around crypto and look where it went. There wasn't even a chance for anyone to pull the parachute. What's happening in banking today? So I think everyone is seeing an environment today where you no longer can look around the bend and see if a truck is coming to hit you. And that's why I said it right in the beginning. Today, we need to figure out how to spot the problems. You won't have a chance to even being a problem solver if you haven't preempted that. So that, I think, is a very, very important part. Because of that, in organizations, to me, the culture of work-life balance, important but controversial. Being open-minded, which means table tennis tables and a glass cabin, but actually the culture can be quite different, is kind of very different. But to me, ownership today, for a lot of people felt I need to be an entrepreneur within an organization. That's a little evolved, right? Because an organization means, I've not met a single town hall where I talk to colleagues, and if I individually ask them, so how do you rate yourself? It's always a 9 and a 10. But when you look at it from a team perspective, it's 4 and 5. And I'm saying the 9 doesn't matter, because if it's 4 and 5 here, you've come into an organization. If you want to be 9, go start a sole proprietorship. But if you're coming into an organization, and if teamwork is 5 and self is 9, you know where the problem is. And then the problem is that you're looking at it from the outside. Well, I'm a 9, I can't help it if this is, and then you're looking for an act of God or an organization culture that's going to change that. And today, organizations don't have the time, the patience, from a consumer point of view and a competitor point of view to do that. So what am I saying is the single aspirational quality? It's your self-ownership. We all have to become, in our jobs, a lot more higher on ownership. So I think if I'm obsessed with what culture one draws in an organization, it's about how to bring more owners, 360-degree approach, not owners as in owning ESOP or owning shares or whatever else. It's ownership where it's a 360-degree accountability. If you have that, you're going to be in the top 20 percentile. If you're not, you're going to struggle being in the top 50 percentile.
Well, you've been doing this throughout our session, but as we slowly come to a close, I'd like to ask you, through your journey of your second innings now, what are the key learnings you've taken from your experiences so far to really ensure scalability and sustainability in Upgrad and all your ventures?
Well, for me at least, anything for scale or even to get success means you need to stick it out. And I think my learning has been exactly what I've practiced all along, which is to stick it out. I think every time the difference between a failure and a possible success is, did you stick it out, right? Because if you're going to call it a day when you had those setbacks, and I think for a lot of people, we make a sort of an artificial deal with ourselves, right? That says, I'm going to give this 3-4 years. And the point is, if you're giving anything 3-4 years or a timeline, you're going to fail. Because it doesn't work that way, because neither can you time it for failure or success. So there I would say to everyone that for me, one of my key learnings is you have got to stick it out. And your approach and mentality to everything is you don't have a choice. If you don't have a choice, you will persevere and go forward on that. And I think at my early days, when I was at the first crossroad and I was convincing my parents that I wanted to start up and be an entrepreneur family, that everyone was a professional, two things really happened that were very stark that I remember very clearly. Both my parents, in a small way, were spooked that I wanted to start something on my own, petrified and scared, but were supportive. And my dad negotiated with me that says, why don't you first do an MBA or your chartered accountancy and then start your stuff? And I think I thought about that for a couple of days to make them feel balanced. But I actually said, that's a plan B. And the probability is if I went with that plan B, I don't think I would have gone with my plan A. Because the minute I felt, it's perfectly fine if this doesn't work out for me, and I think what he was trying to say is, if it doesn't work out for you in 2 years, you can always go out and get a job. And the fact that I would have had that optionality, I think would not have allowed me to stick it out. And I think the second one was the message of saying, look, if this is what you finally want to decide, go ahead, but we want to tell you. Because I came from a lower middle class family, and both of them were very constructive and said, if you're going to lose even ₹1 lakh, we're not the guys you're going to be able to come to because we don't have the resources. So you're going out on your own. What you have is incredible moral support from us, but we don't have any other physical support from us. And when you look at those two criterions, for me, and I think that whether it's second innings or third innings or whatever, that ability that says, I don't have a choice, in your biggest decisions, plan B doesn't count because you normally veer towards that and you never focus on plan A. And sticking it out, I think, is something that has held me in good stead against the multiple failures that one has had.
Ronnie, thank you so much for sharing all your anecdotes. It's been really inspiring to hear your personal journey and how you really had to, as you say, stick it out regardless of family support, funding winter. There was no such option back then as we've been through with you. So thank you so much for that.
Thank you.
It's really been a pleasure. I'm not sure if we have time for an audience Q&A or, okay.
I don't think so. I mean, that timer says a lot, but what do you think? Do we have, sir? Only one? Ronnie, you decide which one then. Leave that to you. There's so many hands.
One?
Yes.
No, we can do 2, I don't care.
Okay, I think this gentleman.
Yeah,
So the mic, please.
There's a mic there.
There's a mic there.
Ronnie, we met during college days and later. So, hello.
College days.
Oh, okay. So, one thing I have realized that entrepreneurship can mean so many different things. But one thing which is really right is having a concept. What a concept?
A concept.
Yeah. What will create value for a customer for the long term? Whichever product it was, and this I can just give Apple as an example, something extraordinary which the customer really wants. Now this is where I think many entrepreneurs, they fall in love with their own ideas, but the customer here doesn't really find a value in them. Could you just enlighten me on this? In fact, I'm writing a book on entrepreneurship. Thank you.
Sure. I'm not sure whether I can enlighten you, but I can give you 2 things. I think you raised 2 different points, so I'm going to answer it in 2 different ways. One is, yes, if you're infatuated by your idea and there's a strong difference between being passionate about what you want to do and being emotional about what you do want to do. And I think when the 2 combine, that normally means it's not going to go very well. So I think, yes, most of us think, I've got a great idea, and then you pause, thinking the whole world is waiting to listen about that. So it is a fallacy that if you have a great idea, that it's not going to, because a great idea without an execution plan doesn't work. So I think that would be very, very clearly one aspect that, but I think the second one here is that if you can take that to the next level would be the most important, which is really the execution part of what we're doing here. So I'm not sure if I fully answered your question, but I think great ideas are not, they're nice for opening lines and they're needed. The second, I'm a true believer, and you mentioned Apple or whatever else, you don't start with a great idea. You have to make an idea great. And I think the bigger ideas and the better ideas that start at a base level, define a customer, have a very down-to-earth approach, and then build up to a great idea. So for me, the catch line for anybody is if you've got such a great idea, the possibility is it's going to fall off the cliff. But if you have a good idea that we can now go out and make great, that's a lovely focus to be.
Thank you. Very inspiring. I think we will have to wrap up. I'm sure the entire audience actually has questions for you. So thank you so much, Ronnie. It's really been a pleasure.
Thank you. Thank you
For
very
all your
much.
insights.